Good morning, everyone. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Fred Costello. I'm the supervisor here in the town of Saugerties. It's my honor to welcome our Congressman. Mark and I go back a long way. We have kind of paralleled our careers in public service. We've had the occasion to work on a number of projects together. This is the first time, however, we're representing mutual constituents. So I'm hopeful that our foundation together in the past will be useful as we move forward and use federal resources, county resources, state resources, and town resources to address the problems we all share. So with that, I'll introduce our Congressman, Marc Molinaro.
Good. I've done these a lot of times, so I'm going to start by saying there is neither a need to clap nor jeer at any point today. My goal is to try to get to as many questions and obviously entertain as many comments as possible. I appreciate it, Supervisor. Thanks for hosting us, and to all of you, thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. I was told a long time ago when I started as a village trustee just across the river in 1993 as an elected official, my good friend Woody Close, a name that some in the area would remember, was a county legislator for a number of years. He said, "In politics, never apologize." And I said, well, I don't really like that. So I generally always apologize. So I'm going to start with an apology. There are 11 counties in the 19th Congressional District. It stretches from Massachusetts to, of course, across the Hudson River, through the Catskill Mountains, to the southern tier, up into what we'll call almost the Finger Lakes region, Ithaca, and central New York. I asked that we try to have a town hall meeting in every county in February and March. The issue is, as you likely know, and I knew when I ran for the office, and now, of course, know it firsthand, there's a lot of time we're expected to be in Washington. And so holding town hall meetings exactly the times we want to do them is always a bit of a challenge. So we've had, this is our 10th. We have one more to go. We had to postpone Tioga yesterday because of the snow. We're trying to have them at different times throughout the day. We've had evenings, we have daytime, we have afternoons. Last week we hosted a telephone town hall, called as many households in the district as is possible with those annoying phone calls. I don't know what you found more annoying, the phone call or my voice, but nevertheless, we're going to continue to do those. There will be more opportunities for us to have conversation, and I welcome it. First and foremost, I think it's probably appropriate to extend our thanks to the... We'll just jump right in. I think most of you here know that I began my public service career a long time ago, as I said, as a village trustee just across the river. I always enjoyed being a village trustee because if there was a problem that I didn't want to handle, I could say, well, you really should talk to the mayor. And then a year later, I became the mayor. And served 12 years as mayor of the village of Tivoli, where I worked with then Supervisor Greg Helsmortal, predecessor of yours, and then mayor of Saugerties, Bob Yerrick. He and I always joked that he was 3 times older than me, but we still found a lot to agree on. We worked together on Hudson River access, and as we learned early on, and I say many times, there are very few things in life that don't extend beyond municipal boundaries. And mostly the only people who care about municipal boundaries are municipal officials. And so access to the river, preservation of our estuaries and tributaries was work that we worked on together, Bob and I, 118 years ago. But what was valued to me in local government, and it's a lesson or several lessons that I still carry today, and I believe them, and so that you're here, I respect that you're here. Whether you have a specific message to offer, whether you supported me or not, it is an important part of the process. We have to talk to one another, listen to one another, and my goal is to learn from you. At the end of the day, we may not always agree, but my job and my commitment is to listen and learn and try my best to represent your interest to the best of my ability for the 2 years I've been guaranteed this office. But I've learned as a local trustee a couple things. Number one, and I say it many times, in local government, when the roof leaks, it leaks on Republicans and Democrats, and the job of the town supervisor is just to fix the roof. A more appropriate analogy today is when the snow falls, it falls on everybody, and it's the job of local government just to plow the snow. I believe it, I know it, I understand it. In local government, we also recognize that the decisions you make, because you're right out in the community, if you're doing this job well, You're doing well?
I think so.
If you're doing this job well, that's not, well, hey, so am I. That's not a guarantee.
Yeah, that's true.
So when you do this job well, when you make a decision, you recognize that the decisions you make have impacts on people. Now, the further away from local government, obviously, the less you see those impacts, but I have not lost, it's never lost on me that the choices we make in elected office have impact on the people we work for, the people we work with, and of course, the community at large. The other is I learned as a village official that it's hard to lie to people. If you go door to door in a village of 1,300 residents, we're close but not all related typically, but nevertheless 1,300 residents, you knock on their doors. If I go to one door and say I'm a New York Yankees fan, and then I go to the other door and say I'm a New York Mets fan, it will not take you very long to find out that I probably lied to both of you. So I am a New York Mets fan, and my goal, of course, is to try to. Obviously, that's a lesson that I carried with me. The other is that I value this. We, as village mayor for 12 years, we probably held about 100 I asked for and was assigned to 2 committees that I very much wanted to represent this district, the House Agriculture Committee and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I also was asked to serve on the House Small Business Committee. House Agriculture, how many know what the Farm Bill is? It's about right. It's usually about a third of the audience. The Farm Bill is America's agriculture policy, and every 5 years it's the responsibility of Congress to reauthorize it. It establishes what is our policy and programs to support farming and farms in America, and how we ensure access to nutritious quality food for those most vulnerable in our community. It is a balance. 85% of the bill is funding basically SNAP and those related services. The rest of the bill funds farming and access to capital. I recognize we're not all going to agree. You and I may not agree. You may not agree with somebody in the audience. You may have a way that you want to ask your question. Feel free to ask it. But let's just be respectful of one another. That means I ask audience members, and I shouldn't say audience members, constituents, all of you, just to let somebody ask or state their comment. I really am going to discourage clapping or jeering. It just wastes time. I understand that you all come here with different views, different values, different opinions.
This morning, I already saw a few hands go up. I think Christine had her hand up first.
Yes.
I don't know everybody's name, so when I call on you, if I don't mention your name, I apologize.
And it's not necessary for you to tell us if you feel like it. I always love to know who I'm talking to, but I'll leave that to you.
Hi.
Hi.
I also am a vet.
Well, there you go. That's the one thing apparently we may have in common.
As you know, maybe others don't, as you know, the debt ceiling is about paying past debt, like paying your MasterCard.
Yes.
The budget is about the future.
Yes.
I am concerned that the debt ceiling is being a political football and ultimately will jeopardize Medicare, Social Security, military pay. Things will be delayed and our economy will possibly tank. I'm asking, can I count on you to vote for a clean debt ceiling, raising it, rather than looking at the budget as the negotiation?
Okay. So, important and good question. Number one, let me say this. Medicare, Social Security, off the table in this discussion. We cannot use Medicare or Social Security as a bludgeon, a cudgel, or a political talking point in the context of America's debt, America's budget. I support, just to be clear, I support, as we have always traditionally addressed, Medicare and Social Security solvency, because you started with those issues, and I do think it's important to acknowledge. In order to address America's Medicare and Social Security solvency, which I believe is a trust between Americans, you pay in, and you ought to be able to get back out, I support a bicameral, bipartisan commission, including the president, to negotiate that over the time that is necessary prior to the, 3 years from now, that either of those become questionably insolvent. That should be off budget, off dialogue. Those are, so that's number one. The term clean debt ceiling is something we've all made up, and we've made it up because it's easy to say, are you yes or no? Here's my view. We cannot default on America's debt. So I accept and believe and support ensuring that America pays for the debt that we've already assumed. That gives us, in this context, about 4 or 5 more months. Can I ask you a favor? I apologize. I know that you're doing this, but it's going to be a little bit, I don't want people to feel like you can come and go. It's like my kids. Get right in your face. Thank you. So number one, yes, we have to pay America's debt. Those are debts that we've consumed, assumed, and we have responsibility for. It's like getting a credit card payment. At the same time, we have 6 months, March? So 5 months, about 5 months to get to that point. The president said when they adopted the omnibus spending bill several months ago, the administration and Congress said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll get about 18 months, and we don't need to address the debt ceiling for another 18 months." What happened because of high cost of living? Now, I'm not going to assume politics, but inflation and inflationary costs made that advance much quicker than expected. Here we are early in the year. We likely have to confront the debt ceiling prior to the end of this fiscal year, this year, not 18 months. The president said, not going to negotiate any of it, which is unusual because there's two things. One, as the president is to do, he develops a budget. He knows that that budget is going to be part of the conversation that we all have over the course of the next couple months. He just released it yesterday or this week, at some point I don't know what day today is, at some point this week or late last week. He then said we're not going to negotiate. And then 2 days later he began negotiating. So my view is this. We have between now and likely September to have this conversation. I want to be sure that America doesn't default on its debt. I want to be sure that America addresses its current spending, rate of spending. I want both of those things to be discussed and negotiated. Those are two different issues, but they will happen at the same time, and I believe they ought to. It is not honest nor responsible to say we're simply going to pay our old debts, but not ask you to control spending moving forward. That is a responsibility on both of us, Congress and the president. So I want that negotiation to happen. It's the reason I joined the Problem Solvers Caucus. And if we have those conversations and there's a commitment to both, I believe that we will get to a solution that will not have America defaulting on its debt, which would be tragic and devastating. And I understand that.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for doing these town halls. Really appreciate it. Your predecessors, Gibson and Delgado, did them. They're really appreciated. We all remember No Show Paso. So my question, you actually addressed it, so thank you. And this will be a shorter version of that. Understanding that there's a lot of negotiating to happen in the next 5 months over controlling spending and various priorities of members of Congress. Quick question is, what would your particular demands be during those negotiations? What are your priorities to secure to make yourself feel comfortable voting for a debt increase? And if you don't get everything you want, when it gets to that 5 months, when the rubber hits the road, are you going to vote with the people who want to default? Or are you going to vote to raise the debt ceiling?
Sure.
Because we saw this week 3 banks that were considered small under the 2018 deregulation failed, and that caused a lot of cascading effects. Can you imagine the cascading effects of not raising the debt ceiling?
I can. And so I'm going to say this to my left-leaning and right-leaning friends right this moment. I will not get all the things that I want. And if you think that I'm going to go to Washington, or any of you would go to Washington and get the things that you want, no matter what side of this conversation you are, we're obviously fooling ourselves. And there are members who do think that that's the only thing that they deserve. Get what I want and nobody else. I don't get to pick the other 434 members of Congress.
Yeah, we know who they are.
And no, but it's both sides. And in fairness, it is both sides.
We know who they are on both sides.
Right. So, but I want to be careful. I just let me make sure I don't do this. I appreciate that. So I'm not going to get everything I want. My priority is a commitment to understanding, a commitment to bending the curve on spending. That's my expectation.
So what would you pass?
No, let's not do this. And so I am willing. I'm not going to go back and forth.
Okay.
But I hear the question.
But that was part of my original question.
And so I am not starting the conversation by you must do these 3 things. My position is negotiate. House, Senate, President negotiate to a point where we commit to bending the curve on spending. I don't want to devastate services that our most vulnerable rely on. I don't want us to undermine those sacred trusts, Medicare, Social Security, that we rely on. I want a commitment to, just as I had to do as a county executive, which is identify ways to get from this rate of spending to something less. And that's between the people who are going to be in the room, and I'll be very candid with you. They're going to be people in the room. I'm not going to be invited to the Oval Office to have this conversation. If I am, perhaps I can have those conversations. But my commitment is simply try to find a way to come to agreement on bending the future curve of spending. And I am comfortable saying the president has certain yes and no's, the House has certain yes or no's, get to agreement. And my goal, my hope is, my position is, America can't default on its debt, so you people negotiating understand I cannot support America defaulting on its debt, and you people negotiating understand that if you don't establish at least behavioral change in spending moving forward, that's a problem. That's my standard. That's it. Oh, thanks. Let's be clear. A couple things. I do. That's important. We had a full Congress briefing the other night with the Treasury. We had a subsequent briefing yesterday. Let's just be clear on Silicon Valley Bank in particular. Much of their investment, uninsured, higher yield, higher risk, and there were investors, not depositors. There were investors in the bank who made risky choices. And California had the capacity and ultimately did take the initial action. Perhaps they could have done it sooner, I don't know. But California regulators had the capacity to shut that bank down. And they chose to do that in concert with the Treasury this week. But to be clear, there were people who invested in that bank, investing the resources of that bank in high yield, high risk investments that were difficult to cash out. And so when a group of people decided they wanted to get out, the bank wouldn't have the money to do it. They had 90% of their deposits in uninsured, basically uninsured accounts. That is not Rondout Savings Bank. That is not, no, but it's important because that is a uniquely different model that, frankly, I don't know who is going to ultimately regulate that unless you assume that there will never be anybody willing to take risks and they shouldn't be punished for taking risks. I want to be sure that the depositors, the smaller businesses, the families who put their money in those bank accounts, and most of those bank accounts in SVB are not those people, but they ought to be protected. But those who choose to take risks with their money, they also shouldn't expect to have that risk socialized by the rest of us. And so that's a unique aspect of SVB and Signature. Signature, I think, was 87 or 82% uninsured deposits. SVB was like 90%. Most of the banks we use are 50 and 60% uninsured. It gives them uninsured deposit. It gives them a blending that allows them to navigate more questionable moments like this. And I did speak to just about all the banks in the 19th Congressional District. I mean, the administration, although I much prefer to talk to people who actually work with folks. And they did receive a number of calls that were confusing, that they weren't sure if their bank was secure or not. So I just wanted to address that as well.
Okay, I'm trying to keep an inventory of all the hands that go up at once. I know you had yours up for a long time, so we're going to select you next.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
you're welcome.
I'm Susan Jaworski, sorry. Thank you for the town halls. I think they're very important. And I'm actually not surprised to see all these signs here and the eagerness. Representative Molinaro, I
Just
think,
Mark.
Okay,
Please.
Mark, you've made some votes that have many of us very concerned about representing New York 19 constituents. And so my question is, on the questions of Medicare and Social Security, will you agree to vote, and I also want to say your policy statements out on your website say you care about defending the programs for Social Security and Medicare. And as these votes come up, will you agree to vote against any policy that cuts services, programs associated with Medicare and Social Security?
I have said this, and I'll say it again, and I don't want to get, I don't know what's going to be coming through a committee or to the floor, and when it does, my commitment is to evaluate the impact and to make a decision. My governing model is Medicare and Social Security should be removed from budget conversations, should not, the solvency of both. So that would mean, within the context of those programs, I would not want to see Congress nickel and dime their way to an outcome. I want Medicare and Social Security to be taken from a congressional debate to a bipartisan, bicameral commission to have that conversation with the president over the next 2 years to decide how we ensure a long-term solvency. That conversation should include some of the, and again, I may agree or not agree, but it should include some of the things that some of these signs advocate, and I assume the people holding them are advocating for. And it should also identify ways to ensure long-term care, long-term solvency of the programs. That's my commitment. And so
You're not answering the question.
Okay, we're not going to do that. And so I understand. The question was, can I? I do not believe that Congress should, nor could I support nickeling and diming. Excuse me, please. Thank you. Nickeling and diming our way to diminish the value or to undermine the programs. I want them off budget, off politics, bipartisan, bicameral commission. That's my commitment. I would support that today if they allowed us to vote on it. That has not come up because I think that those two very important trusts need to not be in the context of political or budget conversation, but rather how do we ensure long-term solvency of both? That's my commitment.
Mark, I just want to...
We're the same age.
Hardly. Two things. One is I want to thank you for the work you've done on people with disabilities, and I know that that's not an arm twister for you, and it's very, very important to you. So I'd like to make sure that you do follow through on that, so that people have access, people with disabilities have access to services, particularly people with developmental disabilities. And second thing, much more local. I live in the town of Ulster, but also feel very fond of being in this county. I know there's been conversations about you're seeking federal assistance for public water to come into Hyde Park at 87. Very important to us.
A couple of things. One is I understand completely what it is to be in a position of having to negotiate with 400 plus other people. Not so easy.
You do?
But well,
I only have 4 kids.
But the point is that we as your constituents also want to know where you originate from in your opinion. So that's why people are asking you.
I appreciate that.
So back to the debt ceiling, I didn't hear an answer there. While I agree with you that those two things have to be addressed, of course, that would be a good family policy in any family. If it comes down to it and you can't get the negotiations for the budget that you want, will you support the debt ceiling?
I don't think it's going to come down to that.
Will you support the debt ceiling? If that comes to it.
You're establishing a hypothetical that I don't know is going to occur. And so I understand you don't like my answer.
I just want you to know.
I appreciate that. And by the way, if you were a member of Congress, I would probably say to you, don't make any hard and fast commitments until you know where the negotiation ends.
Would you want to support the debt ceiling?
I want to make sure America doesn't default on its debt. Yes, I do. I want to make sure.
All right. And then the other thing is about the, I'm going to forget now because I'm on the spot.
You want to move
about Medicare. I just want to know a yes or no answer. Did you sign on to Pramila Jayapal's letter?
I don't know the letter.
You wrote to me about it when I called your office.
But I don't know what...
Her letter to Medicare Advantage asking for different terms.
I don't recall. If you want to send it to me before I leave, I'll take a look at it. I don't know the specifics of the letter. I try desperately not to... I've done this my whole life. I don't like signing petitions either, because I don't know how or what they ultimately are used for, but I don't know the specifics of that letter.
It's your form letter that I got back from your office. Because I called in about Medicare Advantage and the REACH program. And I got it back and it said you cited the letter, but you didn't say that you signed it.
Okay.
That tells me that you know that I care about it and you're citing a letter that matters to me. But I called back and I still didn't get an answer, so I've called 3 times now.
Okay, we'll get an answer.
Okay?
We'll find out.
Pramila Jayapal's letter would help us who want our traditional Medicare protected and don't want it privatized.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me find out.
Thank you.
You're very...
So, and I think...
By the way, he's never said that to anybody left of him, but so I appreciate I appreciate your concession. I know, we're all tired.
We're all retired.
Retired. Oh yes. You will let you get me retired.
There seems like there might be common ground.
There is.
That said, how about another subject on infrastructure, transportation? There seems to be a series of real incidents.
Yeah.
There's not seems, there are. And what is going to happen with regard to that?
So, thank you. This is something that I've dealt with for a very long time. Come from a railroad community, serve as a volunteer firefighter, and of course for 12 years was an emergency manager, where rail derailment was a real concern. In this region, of course, the concern is chemicals that we likely don't know what's on the rail, contaminating not only land and I'm sorry. There's so many.
That's a house review.
That's right. I apologize. I'll give you 2 extra minutes. Not only affect soil and obviously neighborhoods, but have the potential of contaminating tributaries and ultimately the Hudson, where we do have communities take drinking water. A couple things. Number one, we've demanded, and I joined my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, demanded Norfolk has to identify all of the failings that may or may not have occurred that resulted in this. The EPA and Department of Transportation need to identify either a lack of enforcement, meaning there were regulations that we didn't enforce, or were there regulations that should have been that weren't, that resulted in this. In other words, let's understand the disease so that we can determine the medicine. At the same time, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and again, I hate to do this, Congress functions in this committee fashion, right? We call everybody in, we ask lots of questions. We are, in a bipartisan way, demanding answers to those questions. Truly, and again, we can all have our assumptions and we can all believe certain things. What happened, what didn't happen, and was our response the right response? And I've asked the EPA that as well. Is controlled burn of this particular contaminant the right response? And if it is, if you believe it is, when was the last time we evaluated that standard? I've been an emergency responder for a long time to know that we set a standard 20 years ago and then we never think about it until something bad happens. How do we monitor water and air quality, and are there the resources to invest in appropriate mitigation? That's all underway. I'm committed to working with Republicans and Democrats. Pat Ryan and Mike Lawler and I have talked about this. There are others in other parts of this district that have similar concerns, to try to find the right mix. I think that one of the things that we need to be sure we do is polluters need to be responsible for pollutants, not the families immediately adjacent to a contamination. There needs to be the appropriate transparency and oversight, and there needs to be the appropriate penalties. As it relates to transparency and oversight, one of the challenges we have, and we have it in this region, the current standard, and it's been the standard for a very long time, is there's a certain threshold that requires the entity transporting the chemical, right? The contaminant, the hazardous material. There's a certain threshold that needs to be exceeded in order to notify the supervisor, the emergency responders, the community. I think there needs to be greater transparency. We need to know more about what's on the rail, what's on the water, so that we can respond. Second to that, there is insufficient commitment to emergency response. That is federal, state, and local as it relates to this kind of catastrophe. And we haven't done a rail safety plan sort of rewrite in 8 years, 10 years? I was here. And so there needs to be that commitment to providing local resource. The way we respond to emergencies in America is local first, and we expand out. So the Saugerties Fire Department leans on the City of Kingston Fire Department in instances that require a hazardous material response. Is that the only way we can do that? Are there more resources that need to be given? I think the answer is yes, and I'll work with Republicans and Democrats to ensure that we get greater transparency, hold firm on penalties, and that there is support for local emergency responders.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agreed. Go to chat. Beth?
Hi, I'm going to circle back to the debt ceiling again. To me, there are 2 separate issues. One is the budget and trying to cut the budget. The second is the debt ceiling, which is there for commitment to spending that's already happened. So you can negotiate all you want to on the current budget, but the debt ceiling is a separate issue. And with the current financial situation and the uncertainty in the market, and I know you're just a freshman House member, but if you could go back, well, it is true, but if you could go back and convince your party, especially your party leadership, to put the debt ceiling on the floor for a vote, so that it will calm the markets as to wondering whether or not the U.S. is going to default. Waiting 5 months is too long in this uncertain market. And it's also, if you look at the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, Section 4, there's a commitment that the U.S. will pay its debt, no questions asked. And to me, the House is currently in violation of the Constitution by not raising the debt ceiling because you're questioning it when it's already been passed. And I know that there's no penalty for violating the Constitution, which is unfortunate because you all swore an oath to uphold it. So to me, they're two separate issues.
Let's not do that. I appreciate it. I agree, you agree.
No, I'm not looking for applause.
I appreciate that. The gentleman next to you was.
I know that you're one person out of 400, but if you can take that message back, please take it back and scream it into their ears if you have to.
I hear you.
And the other thing I would recommend, if you didn't see it last night, watch Frontline on PBS. It's about free money. So what happened with the two banks is likely to happen in more banks because there's free money. It was available for 10 years at 0% interest.
Wow.
If anything happened, the government.
We talked a lot about spending in terms of negotiating the general budget. I don't want to talk about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. The president has proposed raising taxes on the really rich people, and there do seem to be a lot of loopholes there. What's your appetite for increasing revenue that way?
Very slim.
Very slim.
Yeah, I don't embrace taxing more.
Why not?
Because I think that the federal government doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem.
How about taxing?
That's okay, that's my answer. You wanted a specific answer, I gave you one. Go ahead.
I want to get back into the budget, the debt ceiling. Who is the biggest holder? You know, we want to raise the debt ceiling, okay? My background is I'm a CPA and I used to do financial planning. Who buys our bonds?
Time out.
Who buys our
Hold on one
bonds?
second. I respect that you don't like my answer, but it doesn't give you license to talk over someone else, so please let him speak.
Okay. We have to sell these bonds. Who buys them? Isn't China one of the biggest holders of our bonds? Number one. Number two, all these banks bought U.S. government securities at 0 rates, or very low rates. All of a sudden they raised the rates, and now these banks have problems. The more these bonds get out into the public, the bigger problem we have. You want to tax the rich. I'm just going to digress into another area. Why don't we put a ceiling on the amount of money that the Bloombergs, the Soroses, the Bill Gates can give away to 501c3 nonprofits? They give away $2, $3, $4, $500 million. It's out of their estate. They can manipulate the public with this money. Now, whether you agree with just what George does or what you agree with Bill Gates does is not even the question. They are controlling our society by the amount of money that they give away. $200 million to the university over in, what do you call it, in Tivoli.
Bard College.
Bard College, thank you. That's crazy. Bard College might be a place you agree with. But the idea is that they have that amount of power. I think that should go into the public funds.
There is little question that those with wealth have outsized influence in both government and society. How we confront that, I'm open to the conversation. He was speaking specifically to donations. But I will also tell you that one of the things that I generally, and again, it's aside from the specific point, there are men and women who volunteer every day right here that don't get the similar tax benefit, even though they've committed probably about $100,000 worth of service as a volunteer emergency responder to the town of Saugerties and its district. That is, by the way,
That's a hard thing to evaluate, though.
well, perhaps George should be required to support. Perhaps George and others should be required to support the fire department. But I hear you.
All right.
I need a little longer.
We had, Mom, hang on. We got.
That's your mom?
That's my mom. Kevin has a question. Over here.
Hold on, Mom.
You're getting me in trouble.
Hold on. What time is it? I do have to be in Hudson, but Mom will get the last question.
All right.
Not right. This is not the last question. This isn't the last question, Mom. But we're going to close with Mom. This is a mistake that I know I'm making, but we're going to let you ask the last question, and then you can punish him.
That's what I've had his hand up for a long time.
Yes, sir.
Kevin Freeman from Saugerties.
Sure.
Hopefully a couple quick questions, just yes or no's. On
sure, good
Social
luck.
Security,
Yeah.
do you oppose sunsetting it? And do you oppose raising the age to 70?
I do not want to see Social Security end. And so, again, I really mean this sincerely. I want a bipartisan, bicameral commission to negotiate solvency to ensure the long-term existence of Social Security and Medicare. That is my commitment. I don't want it to default. I don't want it to be sunset. I want the solvency of those two trusts to remain as in perpetuity for Americans moving forward.
And the 70?
That's my answer.
Exactly.
They have to negotiate that, and rather than coming to a particular conclusion on what is the final, I'd like to see, but I believe that there will be, I believe that a commission of that sort would come to an agreement that likely encompasses certain things that I don't necessarily like, but would have to support if they could come together on a long-term solvency plan.
Excuse me. This young lady in the pink shirt.
We've got time for about one more question with our time limits.
Everybody has their hand up.
We're gonna do 1, 2, and Mom. That's it.
Okay.
1, 2, and Mom.
All right.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, ma'am.
Woodstock.
Oh,
And
yes.
I am concerned about this term solar farms. It seems like solar is infrastructure and farms is farming.
Yeah.
And I don't like to see the farms go away. And I don't necessarily, I love the environment. You know, I want to do what we can to have a proactive, cleaner environment. But I don't like this term solar farm where we have, they don't grow food. We can't give away all our farmland to solar panels. So what is your position on that? Can you help me parse those separate issues, or do they get...
So New York conflated them because New York established a siting capacity, right? So New York State says solar development is no longer subject only to local zoning control, as, by the way, other development is. And again, you could agree with that or not. But rather, a siting board can choose how to allow for solar development in your community. To your point, where I come down is the same way we come down on agricultural assessment and benefit. We ought to consider the soil type. And that is the biggest problem we have right now. And to your point of developing solar farms. And again, I call them what you wish. But because of the development pressure and the high cost of doing business in New York with limited access to markets for New York farmers, we're uniquely different than the Midwest. But because of those things, farmers are left with making some really desperate choices. When I first got started in office, it was, do I want a cell tower or something on my farm or not? Now it's this question of, in essence, contracting or leasing to solar. But the state doesn't consider the soil type beneath that solar farm. And because they don't, we're taking valuable, rich land that can be and should be tilled and used for production. We're turning into permanent solar farms. I would rather the state, at the very least, as we do with other environmental reviews, because we do this every day for housing development, we do it for a firehouse, we do it for iPark, what is the environmental impact of what you're doing? And part of that impact is the effect of soil. And if you're taking valuable soil, there ought to be mitigation for that. And if you can't mitigate that, then perhaps there's another site on the property that's more appropriate. That's what the state should do. But it is a state regulation. I'm hopeful that Albany, state legislators, will take this seriously. We are losing valuable farmland. And to the point that I mean, for generations, we've talked about preserving those resources and then developing in and around village, city, and hamlet centers. You can't do that unless you also preserve the active open space. And so there needs to be consideration of that. I don't know that there's a federal fix, but I would push and I do advocate for the same kind of environmental review for these projects as you would anything else, with consideration for soil type and the preservation of soil. For the first time in America's history, about a decade ago, we stopped producing more food than we consume. That is not only an agricultural and food security problem, it's a national security problem. And for those of us who care about where we live, the added pressure to develop on cheap land, because farmland is cheaper to develop on, is going to come back and haunt us. I have this conversation in the central part of this district. I tell them, as they prepare for Micron and other, iParks and other, if you start to see massive commercial development in the places you want, you better have the zoning and the protection in the places you want to protect. Otherwise, you will suburbanize or mall those particular properties, and we'll be right back to where we started. So there needs to be consideration at the state level as well. That was 1, 2, and then Mom. Yes.
Hi, Mark. Tom Andreessen. Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mark. We've got an abundance of immigrants flowing across the border. Right now, there's probably about 4.5 million that have come in the last 2 years. We've got maybe 30,000 that went down into New York City. Taxpayers are paying roughly $500 per immigrant in this state, not just in New York City, but throughout the state. Mayor Adams just recently declared New York City as not a sanctuary city all of a sudden. So, you know, down in Texas and Arizona, they got farmers that can no longer use their crops. The 100,000 that are coming in there monthly are defecating all over their crops. These people are having to defend themselves with weapons to keep them from breaking into their houses. Now, Biden went down there about 2 weeks ago, and of course they cleaned everything up so everything looked pristine. Okay? No sign of all these immigrants coming across the border. The cartels, not just with the fentanyl that can kill every man, woman, and child in this country many times over, right? But they're making more money on the slavery with the women and young kids that are coming in there, the human trafficking. With the power of the purse for the Congress, what do you think they can start to do to close this border? Because everybody in this country is going to be affected by this fentanyl. If they've got any kids or grandkids, 1 in 4 is going to be killed by fentanyl.
So we ought to use our resources to both physically and technologically and through a supportive staff secure our borders. That is a necessity. And by the way, we are seeing similar but not to the degree problem at our northern border. That's a massive concern that has to be addressed using American resources. And I believe that is in certain places physical, in other places it's technological, and of course it's also supporting the staff, the personnel to do that. The issue of fentanyl is not and synthetic opioids, not only at our border, but it's also infiltrating our ports of entry. And to those who celebrate the fact that Border Patrol has identified or made an arrest, that's very important. But think about how many people speed on the Taconic and how many people were pulled over. The issue is that we know that fentanyl is coming into this country, principally directed by China into this country, and it is taking lives. And by the way, it has already affected every family. So no waiting. And that is a catastrophe. It is the public health crisis of our lifetime. I said it before, we all said it before the pandemic, and I will say it again today. Substance use disorder, fentanyl infiltrating this country, synthetic opioids, a public health crisis of our lifetime. And if we saw the number of lives being taken every day on the side of the road or an airplane, we'd be acting a lot differently than we do today. Security, absolutely. Support for community law enforcement to intercept drug trafficking. You have Urgent is the name of the task force here in
Yeah, they changed the name of it though. Because now it's more of a priority program where we have resources that we can apply.
So like the task force you have in Ulster, I will tell you that in Dutchess, I had Dutchess County pay for it because I didn't want the village and town of Saugerties to shoulder the cost. We paid for it. They could give their officer, we covered their cost. It is that important to infiltrate. What we ought to be using our resources at the federal level for is to provide law enforcement, where's the chief law enforcement, the tools, technology, and communication to communicate across jurisdiction. That is challenging. It's somewhat easier to do it here in Ulster among partners, but try to do it with Dutchess or Greene County or Delaware or St. Lawrence County. That kind of interoperability doesn't exist. So what happens is we have this infiltration coming and moving through jurisdictions, and until you find it, you're not able to intercept. That's an issue that we ought to be putting dollars toward as well. And then lastly, I offer to you, it's not just about, and again, on the issue of substance use, it is not only about enforcement, it is about intervention and treatment. No one chooses, I will tell you, my left and right friends, no one chooses to be an addict. There are trauma, there's decisions, but they don't choose to be hooked on a chemical that changes their brain to tell them they need more. They don't choose that. And so intervening at the right moment is critically important, which is why I support, in every aspect we can, leveraging Medicare, Medicaid, and private health insurance to support intervention, both community-based, non-medical, and medical treatment. Short-term, community-based, long-term, inpatient. Spoke to the governor. Governor Hochul proposing $1 billion to expand mental health treatment services. We don't know how. What we need in this region and across the state is long-term treatment. We need actual beds for both adults and juveniles so that they can get long-term care. We need every community to do what Dutchess and then Ulster did, the establishment of those intervention centers, stabilization centers. I believe we should be leveraging those resources to do that as well. And so by using those tools, we can prevent entry into this country, we can intercept that which is being distributed across our communities, and we can treat the individual who needs that treatment and care. Mom, I'm going to regret this, aren't I?
The thing is, we came from Italy. My mom had 8 kids. What do you do with 8 kids? They gotta work. So anyway, my grandfather was alive, my mom and daddy was alive, and he was always complaining, so he dug a cave this long to give us room to grow. We were by the train station, and you are a little kid, you like to see the train, right? We want to see the train every day. And made a noise, kept us awake. Yeah. Yeah.
Say it.
Yeah.
And what would America do?
Oh my gosh.
It gave you opportunity?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Cuomo gave me a great opportunity. I home in my house, there is those special clothes that they wear.
Yeah. All right. All right. You want to thank the Congressman?
Oh, thank you,
We're
all
all
of you.
immigrants. We're all
That's how we live.
Grazie. We will have more of these. There will be other opportunities that we will get together. It could be at a coffee shop. It may be formal like this. To the extent I can control myself, I don't like to necessarily jump and communicate on social media, but I do read social media comments. And don't feel if you're on the social media you have to say things in a pointed way. Say the things you want to say. We read them. We consider them. We will read and get back to those of you who have corresponded with us. Please, we have staff. We have 2 main offices. Our main office in Binghamton, which represents about 25% of this district, Broome County. Secondary office, they don't like when I call it secondary. Secondary office is in Leeds, just north of here. We partner with 3 or 5 others. 3 others to have appointments, and we will also have office hours in the community as we start to ramp up. We're only in we just finished month 2 of this. So there will be more opportunities to have a conversation. I encourage you to reach out. Happy to continue the dialogue as we get together again. Thank you for being here, and please be safe this weekend.